28 years ago this week, on July 4th, 1993, WWE held a Stars and Stripes challenge aboard the USS Intrepid, which is an aircraft carrier built during World War II for the United States Navy, which now sits along the Hudson River in New York City. It was designated a National Historic Landmark in 1986, and on this day it played host to a wrestling ring, and in that ring, various athletes and celebrities were invited to get one chance to step into the ring and try to body slam what they claimed at that time was the 568-pound WWE champion Yokozuna. The list was long, with Bill Fralick of the Detroit Lions coming close to getting the big man up off his feet. Joe Morris and Pete Taglianetti of the Pittsburgh Penguins tried. Scott Burrell, who just days earlier had been drafted by the Charlotte Hornets, was the smartest one of the bunch. He took one look at Yoko once he got in the ring and said, "The hell with this," and he walked right out. Bob Backlund, Crush, who came closest. Scott Steiner, Tatanka, Randy Savage, they all tried and they all failed. Just when it looked as if the evil foreign menace from San Francisco had prevailed, Lex Luger, who up to this point had been portrayed as a self-centered heel calling himself the narcissist, he arrived by way of helicopter wearing an American flag shirt to stand up for Old Glory. He shoved Bobby Heenan aside when Heenan tried to talk to him. He got into the ring, he cut this patriotic promo on Mr. Fuji and tossed him out of the ring. Yokozuna charged at him, but Luger sidestepped him and Yoko hit the turnbuckle. Luger then hit him with his loaded forearm with that big metal plate from the motorcycle accident in his forearm. And then he picked him up and he slammed him. Not the prettiest slam that I've ever seen, but a slam is a slam. That was almost all Yoko, by the way. He jumped into that. Everyone celebrated, and just like that, Vince McMahon's attempt to create the next Hulk Hogan was, in his mind, complete. You know, the infamous Lex Express came next, where they put Luger on a bus. He went on a bus tour around the country all the way through the end of August, all the way up until SummerSlam, where he failed to win the championship, but celebrated as if he had. Looked like a fool. Between the chopper entrance on the Intrepid and the bus tour, Vince McMahon tried his damnedest. I gotta give him credit. He tried his damnedest to get Luger over as the next big babyface. But Luger didn't have the real missing ingredient. If he was looking for a new Hulk Hogan, Luger did not have Hogan's charisma. He had a better physique. He had more hair on his head, but he lacked the charisma that Hogan had. And that SummerSlam finish, that was the nail in the coffin. He was still a fine babyface. I mean, it's not like people were booing him out of the building, but you could tell they were not overly enthusiastic for him. And it's been said that Vince McMahon simply decided that he wanted Luger to get the big title win at WrestleMania. He wanted to delay it until WrestleMania. But it wasn't going to matter. Even if he had delayed it and gave him the championship at WrestleMania in Madison Square Garden, it would not have mattered. It was never going to work. Luger was not Hulk Hogan. Luger was not even Bret Hart, which is who the fans wanted to see. That's why he ended up with the championship at WrestleMania and not Luger, because the people made it very clear who they wanted in that spot. 27 years ago this week, on July 3rd, 1994, at a Superstars taping in Ocean City, Maryland that aired on July 30th, Bret Hart pinned Bob Backlund with a small package to retain his WWE title. This was, and it's been years since I've seen it, but this was, as I recall, an awesome match. This was the best of all of the televised matches that these two had. I mean, their WrestleMania 11 match absolutely sucked. I wasn't even really a big fan of their Survivor Series. I mean, I like the story they told at Survivor Series in 94 with Owen and, Bret trapped in the chicken wing for, I think it was like 9 minutes or something. Owen trying to deceive his parents and his mom into throwing the towel into the ring. This was the best match that these two had. And very soon, you should be able to see it on Peacock, because they have Superstars episodes uploaded right now through, last I checked, I think it was May of 1994, or at least part of May of 94. And this is from the July 30th episode. So it looks like unfortunately they're uploading new Superstars in buckets of 8, which is not a lot. I mean, they used to put up like 20 new episodes at a time. Now they're doing like 8 at a time. But before long, this episode should be up, and I encourage you all to watch the match if you've never seen it before. When it was over, Backlund was very upset, but he shook hands with Bret. And Bret then he made a cardinal mistake. He went in for a second handshake. And that is when Bob Backlund died and Mr. Backlund was born. He slapped the taste out of Bret's mouth. He locked on the crossface chicken wing. He refused to let go of the hold. On commentary, they couldn't even pull him off. On commentary, they said it's like he had the strength of 10 men. Finally, the referees pulled him off. Backlund just sat there on his knees staring at his hands like he couldn't believe what he had just done. This was the start of the Crazy Bob character. And he would go on to win the title from Bret at the Survivor Series before dropping it 3 days later to Diesel in 8 seconds in Madison Square Garden. Referee Joey Marella also worked the taping that night on what would turn out to be his final night. Marella was the adopted son of Gorilla Monsoon. He officiated 2 of the most iconic matches in WWE history in front of the 2 largest crowds in company history up to that point. Hulk Hogan against Andre the Giant at WrestleMania 3, and Bret Hart against Davey Boy Smith at SummerSlam from Wembley Stadium. After the show that night, he fell asleep at the wheel on the New Jersey Turnpike and was killed in a single-car accident. He was only 31 years old. Mike Chioda talked about Marella last year on Talk is Jericho. He did an interview after he was released from WWE. And I was really happy at the time to hear him talk about Joey, because you don't really hear anybody talking about him anymore. I guess why would they? You don't have too many referees who are going out there who knew him doing interviews like this. So it was nice to hear him talk about it. It was sad to hear him talk about that night. Chioda said they had been on the road for 17 straight days. And he and Tony Chimmel invited Marella to come stay with them for the holiday, 4th of July. They're going to have a few days off finally. We can go hang out together. Joey wanted to visit his mother in New Jersey. And he was driving with Bruno, downtown Bruno, Harvey Whippleman. Harvey had his seatbelt on. Joey did not. Joey dozed off, and he crashed right by the exit where his mother lived. Now, Whippleman survived, and Joey did not. And Chioda said that he and Chimmel, they drove past the accident that night, but they had no idea at the time that it was Joey. They said there were police cars and there were fire trucks everywhere. They slowed down to watch because that's what people do when they see a bad accident on the road. But it wasn't until the next morning that they found out it was Joey in that car. And the person who called to tell him? Gorilla Monsoon. 23 years ago this week, on June 28th, 1998, one of the most famous or infamous, depending on how you look at it, matches in wrestling history took place at the King of the Ring in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And it wasn't even originally supposed to happen. Mick Foley was coming off 2 straight pay-per-view matches with the new WWE champion, Steve Austin, both as the Dude Love character. Their over-the-edge match, one of my all-time favorites. These 2 guys were having so much fun recapping the end of that match on the latest Broken Skull sessions. Austin had beaten him decisively in that match, but according to Bruce Pritchard on his podcast, the King of the Ring match was supposed to be the 3rd meeting with Austin and Foley. I don't know which face of Foley it would have been, but it would have been Austin and Foley again for the championship, but Vince McMahon wanted to do something different. He wanted to shake things up, which is what led to Austin having a First Blood match instead with Kane. Well, that left Mick Foley without an opponent, so Vince McMahon decided to match him up again with The Undertaker, even though The two of them had already had about 5 or 6 pay-per-view matches together, going back to 1996. When Foley found out that it would be inside Hell in a Cell, his words to Pritchard were, "How the hell do I top that?" He didn't think that there was anything he could do that would top what Shawn Michaels and The Undertaker did in the original. So he went to his mentor, he went to Terry Funk for advice, and Terry half-jokingly suggested, well, why don't you guys start on top of the cell, and then let Undertaker go ahead and throw you off the top. Well, that's a dangerous thing, even jokingly. That is a dangerous thing to say to Mick Foley. He took the suggestion seriously and told Funk he thought he could do it. He just had to sell Undertaker and Vince McMahon on the idea first. And it took weeks of Undertaker saying, no, absolutely not, before he finally relented. And it wasn't until he was actually up on top of the cage during the live pay-per-view that he cursed himself out and realized, oh shit, this is much higher than I thought. Because he hadn't gone up there until we saw him on top during the pay-per-view. Well, he gets up there, he looks down and says, ah shit, this is higher than I thought. It was like a legit 16 feet up. But once he was up there, there was no turning back. And so off he went. In one of the most iconic moments in WWE history, with Jim Ross providing the soundtrack, as God is my witness, he is broken in half. Only to then climb back up the cage and be chokeslammed through the cell down to the canvas, which is so much worse than the bump through the Spanish announce table. I know that's the one that looks more spectacular. Like, that's the highlight reel bump. You see him, like, almost gracefully flying through the air, down through the announce desk. But that bump he took through the cell was so much worse. It was so much more brutal. Undertaker legitimately thought Foley was dead after that second bump. He hit with such force, and these were those old WWF rings. I think it was like a year or two later. They finally softened the rings a little bit. Once Vince McMahon started wrestling and taking bumps in the ring, I think is around the time, magically, the rings were no longer as hard as they used to be. But this was at a time when, I mean, they had almost no give to them. It was like falling on concrete. It was sickening. Terry Funk said that top part of the cell was rigged to sag a little bit, and I guess for dramatic effect, the idea was that Foley would then roll off of it, roll down to the mat. But everyone involved claims it was never supposed to just completely give out the way that it did. Foley was knocked unconscious for a few seconds. He continued the match, though, including the thumbtack spot that he didn't even remember doing when the match was over. So they're in the back. Foley asks Undertaker, did I use the thumbtacks? And Undertaker had to tell him, dude, look at your damn arm. He still had tacks sticking in his arm. He didn't even realize it. It's the match that Mick Foley will always be remembered for. I can remember watching it with my father and just our shocked reactions when he went flying off in those first 90 seconds. You know, it's a hard match to grade. It's hard to grade it as a match. As a spectacle, the fucking thing, I mean, it gets 6 stars. As a match, you know, it depends. Everybody kind of looks at it differently. I still look at Shawn Michaels and The Undertaker in 97 as the best Hell in a Cell match of all the cell matches they've ever done. This one, I look at it differently. It was so much more of a spectacle than any of the other Hell in a Cell matches. But as a match, you know, to me, I can't say that it's number one. Undertaker worked the match with bone chips in his foot, so he was hurting as well. I mean, not as much as Mick was when it was over, but both guys came out of this worse for wear. Foley, I'm sure, was severely concussed. How could he not be? How could he not be severely concussed? His jaw was dislocated. He had 3 teeth dislodged, one famously sticking out of his nose. His jaw was put back into place by Francois Petit, who was the first person you see scurry, the guy with the ponytail, scurrying into the ring, or into the cage to check on Mick after he fell into the ring. They billed him as WWE's medical doctor on TV, but in reality, he was a shiatsu masseuse for Vince McMahon and Steve Austin. And he also played the role of Sub-Zero in the first Mortal Kombat movie. Little trivia note for you. I met Foley 2 weeks after this match. They sent Foley, Owen Hart, Mark Henry, and Luna Vachon into our luxury box. I had won tickets from a radio station. My very first Monday Night Raw is War. I'm so excited. I'm the first one in the luxury box, so we get to get the front row. We open the window. And, at the Meadowlands, some arenas have luxury boxes like way, way, way up. These were like at the midway point. We had a great view of the ring, right? I'm in this great mood. And here come Owen and Foley and Henry and Luna. And, as a younger fan, you're on cloud nine. You're like, holy shit, this is awesome, right? And I just remember, and Foley was nice and all, but I remember looking at Mick. He was wearing the Mankind stuff, but he didn't have the mask on. And you could just tell he was not in good shape. He was definitely in, let's just say, some degree of discomfort. I can't believe they didn't just tell him after that pay-per-view, hey, dude, take a month off. I mean, I don't think anybody would have said no if he had asked for time off, but, I mean, that's just not what you did back then. You didn't ask for time off. If you were hurt, you hit it. It's just what a lot of guys did. But there were other matches on that King of the Ring show, believe it or not. Ken Shamrock beat The Rock in the finals to become the first babyface King of the Ring since Bret Hart 5 years earlier. And in the main event, boy, these guys must have been watching that Hell in a Cell match going, fuck my life. How the hell are we supposed to follow that? Stone Cold Steve Austin defending the WWE Championship in a first blood match against Kane. If Kane didn't win the title, he promised to set himself on fire, which sounds a little extreme. Although I appreciate them at least making the title feel important. Austin was in the hospital for about 3 days, leading up to this pay-per-view with a staph infection in his elbow. You can see his elbow's all bandaged up when he comes out. Foley actually had to do a run-in in this match even after everything he had gone through. He ran as best he could, down to the ring to get involved in the finish, which saw Austin get busted open and Kane announced as the new WWE Champion. A shocking finish for those of us who thought Austin would have this long run as champion. But there was a method to the madness, as the next night on Raw, WWE drew its third highest rating in the history of the program for a show headlined by Kane, defending the title in a rematch against Steve Austin. Kane had all of 24 hours to enjoy his time as champion, as Austin regained the title. The show did a 5.3 Nielsen rating. The segment with the title change drew a 5.9 and a 10 share. Good for more than 4.3 million viewers. The 3-minute overrun after Nitro had already gone off the air did a phenomenal 6.9 rating in more than 5 million homes. It was all about the ratings back then. Even more so than today. It was all about the ratings back then. Today, they have their guaranteed TV money for the next few years, so they don't care. They don't care. And it shows, believe me, it shows, especially on Mondays, it shows. This episode of Raw also featured the debut of Steven Regal with a win over Darren Drozdov. It was one of the only maybe the only TV appearance that Regal made before they sent him to a training camp to get into shape. This is when he was hooked on painkillers. He did not look good at all. And also the debut of the ill-fated Brawl for All tournament, with Steve Blackman beating Mark Merrow and Bradshaw beating Henry Godwin.